Hello, my name is Merja Laitinen.
And my name is Nikupeteri.
Our presentation is connected to our ongoing research project funded by the Academy of Finland, Children's Knowing Agency in Private, Multi-Professional and Societal Settings, the case of parental stalking. This is a multidisciplinary project including social work, law and education. We approach stalking as a form of violence against women and children, and the broad aim is to learn how children experience post-separation stalking and how does it impact on their well-being. First, we shortly define how we have understood stalking in our research. Then we will shed light on some of our research results based on different qualitative research data collected with children and young people, and case files on court decisions in stalking cases. It was collected nationwidely and it includes files from all the district courts in Finland during first 4 years after criminalization. Finally, we will conclude with some practical messages.
We could start by the definition of anti-stalking law in Finland. Stalking was criminalized in Finland in 2014, which means that is it 7 to 8 years old law now here in Finland. If we highlight something from the law definition, it defines stalker as a person who repeatedly threatens, observes, contacts, or in another comparable manner unjustifiably stalks the other person. And this behavior is conducive towards instilling fear and anxiety in the person being stalked. And there will be a sentence for stalking to a fine or to imprisonment for at most 2 years. This data extract illustrates how this judicial definition comes into reality in children's lives and how children are affected by the father's stalking even when they are not the primary targets or primary victims of the stalking behavior. This is a data example of siblings discussion, and it describes the stalking as a course of conducts and also the father's repeated acts and how the father's visits at children's and mother's new home raise fear in children. Someone had walked around our house. There were tracks in the snow. It was a little bit scary. Someone had stood under our window when we were sleeping but I remember, do you remember that night when the dog circled our home at night? I suppose that Daddy was walking around our home at that time. Yeah, the dog was going from one window to another. I think it was happening at the same time. And then he was knocking on the windowsill, and we were really frightened. He has visited so many times that I can't remember every time. We could say some words about stalking as a form of violence. In our research project, we have approached or defined stalking as an intense and pursuit-oriented behavior toward a person that consists of repeated actions and the target perceived these actions as intrusive, threatening and distressing. Previous research shows that fleeing or escaping domestic violence is the most dangerous time for women and children. When the women and children start to plan the separation or moving into a new home, it can aggravate the violence. Also, the studies show that the period after separation can include lethal violence against the mother and children. In Denmark, there has been a study concerning children's post-traumatic stress symptoms in these stalking cases. And this Danish pilot study shows that children whose parent was stalked demonstrated a high number of post-traumatic stress symptoms. This study included children at different ages, and it shows that 56% of the overall sample met the criteria for post-traumatic stress symptoms. One issue related to stalking is the perpetrator's coercion of organizational networks as a part of the stalking behavior. Australian study shows how complex family circumstances, such as parental separation, custody disputes, and domestic violence intersect with the school's organizational cultures and school everyday practices. In particular, this Australian study shows the ways how coercive control, which is a strategy usually used by men to dominate or oppress their female partners in the context of intimate partner violence. So how this coercive control can be deployed to manipulate and coerce the school's staff and school's organizational networks into furthering the perpetrator's abusive agendas. Next, Merja will continue to look forward more deeply to children's perspectives.
Stalking can appear differently in children's everyday lives. It can pose lighter or darker shadow above their daily activities and relations. In this table we have illustrate different forms of stalking from children's perspective. The ground is in the atmosphere of fear and feelings of insecurity. This form of stalking comes visible in all of children's lives who have participated in our study. Acts of stalking includes spying, indirect or direct verbal and physical threats to the mother or children, and different kind of emotional burdening. Children's role is somehow subordinated, and they are victims of emotional abuse. Implications of stalking are seen as mistrust and sense of insecurity. Often different kind of disguised acts of stalking are connected to atmosphere of fear and feelings of insecurity. Stalkers' performances of love, care and longing are connected to different kind of neglecting care of children. Children's role is both neglected and cheated care receivers, but they are also active players inside these cases. And it is really important to see and recognize from children's perspective that those perpetrators are not only evil, but they are also good persons. Children have received attention, care, and they have experienced good things also with those persons. So our implications are complicated, and somehow this kind of emotional trap of good and evil are present in children's lives. And then children are exploited differently in stalking, and this is really important dimension of stalking. This includes different kind of interrogation, mental burdening, manipulation, economical control, and children are different kind of means or tools in stalkers' activities. They are also mediators between the stalker and the primary victim. Their mother, they are informants, they are controllers, they are objects, and this poses mental ambivalence to children. They feel guilty, they feel anger, and this kind of socio-emotional sense of stalking poses a shadow around their daily lives. And of course, there are also cases where stalking reaches more severe situations where physical abuse, violent acts and threat of death is present. Children can be isolated, they can receive different kind of threats that a mother will be killed or pet will be killed or you will be killed if you don't do it or that. Some children have been kidnapped, their meals have been poisoned, they have been victims of different kind of violent acts. And in these cases, they are victims of physical and emotional abuse. And as you all understand, different kind of psychosocial and physical injuries are central in these cases. And because it is not known when the next attack comes and what kind of it will be, children are in continuous alert, which is stressing. Overall, in all forms of stalking, it prohibits children to live secure and predictable life. And next, here is one typical example how stalking appears in children's lives and how they can be involved in the father's behavior, how they become tools and exploited victims. Back then, he still tried to get in contact with us children, or actually to get in contact with mom through us. He sent messages to us too, and he was like, let me know how mom is doing, and you can get 10 euros if you send me a photo of mom.
We have also looked at the fathering in the context of post-separation, violence and stalking. And we identified 3 themes regarding children's experiences of fatherhood and fathering. The first dimension is the dangerous fathering. In this theme, the fathers use power and control over the children and their mothers. They use different kind of violent acts and violence. They make threats to injure the children and mother, or death threats. They intimidate the children and mother. They stalk and punish the children and their mothers. This dangerous fathering makes children frightened and feeling unsafe. If we look at next the undermost box, which is admirable fathering, this describes also how the father uses power and control over the children and their mothers. Here is important this manipulation. The fathers manipulate the children and mothers and also other people who are involved in the family's life. The fathers appear to be caring fathers, indulgent fathers, and they are also concerned fathers. They are concerned about their children's well-being and whether the mother can take care of them. They appear to be also vulnerable victims, which means that the fathers or the perpetrators can make themselves to seem like the victim, and at the same time make the mother, the real victim, to look like a perpetrator. The fathers often direct these performances of admirable fathering at professionals and communities, for example at other parents at schools or kindergarten. And by doing these performances, they conduct a coercive and controlling behavior against the mother and children. Fathers misuse the society's norms and values around fathers. What are the father's rights, and how the fathers and parents should be to being a good and caring parents. In between the dangerous fathering and admirable fathering is this omnipresent fathering. This omnipresent fathering makes children feeling mental and emotional states where they are worried, they feel anxiety, and they feel fear. And these feelings are ever present in their everyday lives. And through this omnipresent fathering, the fathers maintain control, domination and emotional power over children when they are not even physically present. Here we have one data example concerning the dangerous fathering. And this describes how the perpetrators, the fathers, target their dangerous behavior at relatives and professionals, and also intimidate those who try to help the children and their mothers. He went to mother's workplace to threaten her. We couldn't stay in our home or in relatives' homes, so then we had to go to some other place. And then it started that everybody who kind of helped us, they got also death threats. In the end, in the refugee, the workers also started to get those threats, and he went there, raging outside the refugee. This data example describes how such fathers' behavior entraps children and their mothers and obstructs them from seeking help. This child's data example convenes her and her mother's options being reduced little by little, and how this father's behavior shrink the everyday lives of the mother and children. And in the end, even a refugee is an unsafe place for them. Would you like to continue with this technological dimension in stalking?
Yes, based on analysis of court case files, we identified 3 dimensions of technology-facilitated parental stalking. All dimensions are connected to the contexts of father-perpetrated coercive control. These are intertwined and can appear in single case. First, these threats of violence and death against children. In these threats undermine children's relationships and mental well-being and hinder also child education and employment prospects. Intrusive and obsessive fatherhood causes a continuous sense of threat in children's lives, and children were also approached coercively and instrumentally as part of father's pursuit of the mother. The third one are disparaging and insulting motherhood and womanhood. This dimension shows how a stalker can undermine children's positive views of their mother by presenting her in upsetting or shaming ways that exploited cultural ideas of women as mothers and sexual beings. Within all these dimensions, technology enables constant coercive and controlling abuse. It also maintains abusive parenthood, and it magnifies gendered tactics of abuse. So technology has multidimensional role in these cases. Here we have one example of case files. The child came to ask me on Friday morning, why I'm receiving these kinds of photos of you. I looked through the messages and noticed that the sender was the ex-partner. He had previously demanded that I take photos of me and send them to him. So some of these photos I have taken voluntarily. Now he has sent these photos and videos to my child. Next, we will go forward, and Anna will tell more about impacts of parental stalking.
Yeah, in the previous slides we have shown how stalking appears in children's lives and how they experience it. And now, as Merja mentioned, we could look at more the impacts of parental stalking in children's lives. The first dimension is that stalking causes a sense of insecurity, fear and dread of death, which I think has been quite well described in the data examples from children's interviews and the court case files. The second dimension that we have identified is that stalking changes the roles in families and also the family dynamics. Father's stalking behavior threatens the social stability of the family. Children can have ambivalent or negative relationship with their fathers. Especially the younger children have the ambivalent relationship, but the older the children get, the more negative relationship they tend to have with their fathers. And while the children's relationship to the father gets distanced, the relationship with the mother and siblings get even more closer, both emotionally and physically. The data also show how children start to be as young carers. Especially the older children may take care of their younger siblings and their mothers. The third impact that we have found is that stalking shrinks the social networks and reduces the children's social life. The sense of fear and insecurity constrains children's social networks, how the children can meet their friends and relatives, and where the children can go. Children may not have a safe place. The father can appear anywhere at any time, both in the public places and in private places. Children often have days off from school because they want to protect their mother and siblings. Also, the children's social relationship with friends get reduced because they may not want to invite friends to visit them because they are ashamed of their father's behavior or afraid that the fathers suddenly come to home when the friend is visiting. And the fourth main impact that we have identified is the complexities on being acknowledged as a victim and receiving help. The perpetrator may exploit the helping system and manipulate the professionals as a strategy to control the children and their mothers, as has been shown already in the previous slides. And the blurred boundaries of stalking behavior and exercising the legal rights is complex. For example, the professionals has to weigh whether they emphasize the father's right to see his children or children's possibilities for safe lives. And it is good to recognize that also, professional interventions do not always stop father's stalking behavior. The father can still continue stalking by using proxy stalkers, which means that use of third parties to stalk the ex-partner, the mother and children. And this can be even when the father is in prison. As we have shown, the father stalking appears in children's lives multidimensionally, and this poses big challenges for professionals to intervene in these cases and also to support and help the children who live in these circumstances. Here we have three key aspects of helping the children. The first one is the understanding the nature of post-separation stalking and recognizing the victim's need for various forms of help and support. For example, it is important that professionals approach parental stalking as a form of gender-based violence, which help to recognize the victims, the children's and their mothers' need for different kind of help and support. Secondly, the second key aspect is creating inner and outer safety for children and mothers. And this aspect emphasizes the importance of creating physical security for children. For example, setting alarm systems at home or providing a security button for the mothers, and how this physical security can also increase the children's and their mothers' inner security. And the third important aspect is the multi-agency risk assessment with mothers and children's. It is important that professionals cooperate and evaluate the possible risk that the family situation can have. And now Merja will tell our main practitioner messages.
Thank you. From children's perspective, it's important to understand post-separation stalking as multifaceted phenomenon. It is also important to recognize the harmfulness of technology-facilitated stalking in children's lives. Technology enables constant, coercive and controlling abuse to children's lives. It is also important to evaluate children's belonging to their family relations subjectively. Children's belonging to siblings, to mother and to stalker varies even between the siblings in the same family. And it is also important to see children as victims in their own right, although the primary victim is the mom. Post-separation stalking calls us to rethink the protection from children's perspective. The studies show the seriousness of post-separation violence and children's need for protection in these circumstances. We need more child-oriented ways to protect children in these cases, where children's physical and social security is quite difficult to guarantee. Children's fear of violence in their everyday lives should not be overlooked. Protection is conceived of as processual, stretching beyond the service user position and encompassing multiple parts of children's everyday lives. Children may not have a say in situations where professionals regard contacts between a child and his or her father as being in the child's best interests, even though such contacts may pose a risk to the child and mother as a way to continue violence. Child's relationship with their safe parent are important in protecting children as agentic subjects in their everyday lives. And also these safety plans for each child individually are important to be done. And as Anna mentioned already in previous slide, it is important to coordinate interprofessional collaboration in providing continual support and security for children in their different spheres of life. As we know, these stalking cases can continue several years, so this continuity is really important.
Now in the end we would like to give the final words to these children. This data example shows children's visits to professionals and service system. Their hopes to live in peace and secured lives, and also having possibilities for well-being in this challenging family situation. I would say that you wouldn't necessarily support the families staying together, but you would rather support the children's well-being. They professionals don't always, home is not always the best place to be. Maybe it is also about children wanting to protect their parents. It can be so that they say that or the child may feel guilty if they talk against their parent or tell others what the parent has done, and the child ends up by saying that he doesn't want to be separated from the parent. Thank you for listening our presentation, and if you have some questions, don't hesitate to contact us. Here are our emails, and so you can send us some posts. And you can also find more information about our project and the research findings from our project website. And many of our publications are open access, so you can read those freely in internet. Thank you.